Some believe that Ashton Carter's visit to Japan is to consolidate, of course, Japan-U.S. military alliance. But the problem is Ashton Carter's term, actually President Obama's term, will serve out in about 70 days. So what kind of alliance will be looking like between Japan and the U.S. during Trump administration?
There are at least two possibilities we can say at this moment by the new administration of the United States. Donald Trump might, continue the momentum to intensify the relations with Japan, because Japan has been a very important ally in this region, and in order to, consolidate the defense posture of the United States in this region, I'm sure the United States will continue the momentum to, intensify the capability of the United States. And another possibility is, as Donald Trump said during the campaign, and he might reduce the presence of the United States, especially its military, in this region. In my opinion, I think the future, Donald Trump, the president-elect, will continue the momentum. So this is my assessment.
Yoichi, what is your take? You think it is going to be a stronger or weaker military alliance between the U.S. and Japan?
Well, we're really in the preliminary phase, and Donald Trump is a very good tactician, a businessman, and he's basically playing upon the rivalry between Japan and China. And he realizes that Japan is the easier party to deal with because it's more dependent on the U.S. China is much more of a force on its own. So, of course, he's going to play this game right now when it doesn't cost him anything. He's not president yet. He has no strategy really developed yet. This was pointed out by his appointee as Defense Secretary, James Mattis, who co-authored a book with George Shultz, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. It was published by the Heritage Foundation, in which they called for a strategy both globally, but also for Asia in particular. So it's going to be quite a while, a real shakedown, before Donald Trump's team does have a real policy to Asia. Right now, this is just preliminaries and just jockeying for some position.
And during his campaign, he has been saying that Japan should pay more for the military expenses of the U.S. troops stationed there. And recently we heard the Japanese defense minister saying that might be difficult because Japan has already paid very much. Do you think the Japanese will stomach a much bigger bill for defense because of the U.S. Military presence there?
Well, Japan's own defense budget has been really ratcheted up. It's been rising about 2% a year. It's about $50 billion now. So Japan's had no hesitance in terms of building up its own military forces, and is preparing to take over some of those American military bases. So I don't think there's a real problem of paying for the bases. I think Japan would like to see transfer of those bases to Japanese control. Now, that said, what's really going on right now with Ashton Carter's visit, why he's in such a rush to get to Japan and India, that's to close all these arms deals. The United States is supplying Japan with F-35 attack jets, shipboard missiles to attack other ships, and anti-missile systems for aboard ships, along with electronic warfare system. So the Obama administration right now is trying to cash in for Lockheed and other defense contractors right now. That's the hurry right now and what this is all about. So Japan has been willing to pay, for weapons. Shinzo Abe basically has a very militaristic outlook and has no hesitation to take out a checkbook for weapons.
But we understand there is also debates within Japan about what is Japan's relations with the U.S. should be looking like. Analysts say Japan's rightist forces are actually hoping to get rid of the U.S. Control as their long-term goal. But obviously, Abe here wants to consolidate U.S.-Japan alliances. What do you make of the disconnect?
Well, the problem is, I think everybody in Japan knows that any nuclear umbrella is going to come from the United States. Japan cannot do it alone because the Japanese people because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, will not support that. If Abe actually announces a nuclear strategic capability, he'll be voted out of office, and that'll be the end of that, and the peace constitution will stay the same. On the other hand, I think he's really playing with fire right now. I don't know if anybody recalls, but today is December the 7th, and it's very special. It's the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And Shinzo Abe plans to go there at the end of this month, and he's not going to make an apology. He's only going to go there for remembrance. And we have to remember, this is what got America into the Pacific War. 2,000 servicemen were slaughtered there without warning. And so this is not going to go over very big with Donald Trump's nationalist populist supporters. I think Abe is walking into a death trap for himself politically.
Now we have another guest on the line, Mr. Douglas Paal, the Vice President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr. Paal, what is your take on the future U.S.-Japan relationship will be looking like? There were a lot of harsh words from Donald Trump during his campaign against China, against Japan. What is the Asia policy of Donald Trump be looking like?
Well, the most important thing he said during this campaign was that Japan should pay more to defend itself. That's something that Mr. Abe wants to do anyway. So having some foreign pressure on the Diet to increase the budget suits his political purposes. I think that's going to be a source of trouble. Moreover, Japan by itself feels threatened by China, and the United States feels that by itself, without Japan, we can't provide adequate protection for our interests in East Asia. So there's a mutual need for the U.S. and Japan to stay close together based on objective realities rather than just on sentiments.
But it seems it's not something the Japanese politician can stomach, either to increase the military expenses from Japanese side, or weaker alliances with the U.S. to counter China's rise?
I don't think there's any room in the Japanese political scene for someone to try to separate from the U.S. The days of leftist politics ended in the early 1990s in Japan with the end of the Cold War. So I don't expect to see that kind of development. And there is plenty of room in the Japanese budget for increase up to maybe 1.5% of GDP in the next few years.
Let's talk about Trump's foreign policy in general, because many people still don't know exactly how Mr. Trump will carry out his foreign policy. So far, he has only chosen his defense secretary and national security advisor. He hasn't chosen Secretary of State. But it seems there are still a lot of unknowns about what's going to be the focus of Trump's diplomacy and what kind of resources he's going to invest in. What is your take, Mr. Paal?
Well, I, like everybody else, I don't really know what his intentions are. So I have to fall back on analyst tools. And the analyst tools say, look at the fundamentals. What is driving American interests, whether it's in the Middle East with Russia, Europe, or in the Far East with Japan and China? I think in those cases, he's going to be driven by the fact that we have very large trading relationships, very large security relationships, and association of values with many of the parties that we have alliances with, that will be a source of continuing connection, continuing mutual reliance going forward, despite the rhetoric of the campaign and despite some of the confusing signals that have come out during the interim period.
Mr. Teng, what do you think Donald Trump will inject into the trilateral momentum among the United States, Japan, and China?
I think on one side, the president-elect will continue the momentum, will enhance the relations with Japan. And on the other side...
Enhance, not weaken.
Yeah. And on the other side, he will continue the good relations in cooperation like the regional affairs and international affairs, and also in trade. And it seems to us he just trying to manage the United States as a company. He now in recent 1 month, he has chosen a lot of candidates for the officials in the administration. And
So you are
this
saying
is quite
he's-
unusual,
He's treating country-to-country relationship as a business.
Yeah, as a business, and on one side he will, enhance his relation with Japan in security, and on the other side, of course, he will continue the the trade cooperation with China because the market, the potential capability in production and other aspect gave the two countries a lot of opportunity. For example, the production of a cell phone, actually the production chain, the high level. The United States possess the intellectual copyrights and some other products, and the Chinese side only produce the cell phone. So there are a lot of complementarities between the two sides. This is actually, I think, will continue the cooperation in the future.
Another thing is TPP. Mr. Abe has been a proponent of this trade agreement, actually. And now with Donald Trump in power, TPP is thrown out of the window. How will that change the trade relations between U.S., Japan, China, and U.S.?
And I think Donald Trump might choose a bilateral trade relations, not a multilateral approach to have trade cooperations, because any bilateral cooperation in trade will give a great advantage to the United States, rather than a multilateral approach to do business. This is actually a very specific interest for the United States and for Donald Trump, because he would like to be the key player in any trade cooperation, not in the general consent. So this is a very important change for the future economic and trade cooperation between China and the United States, between U.S. and Japan.
And Yoichi, this must be one of the reasons why Mr. Abe rushed to New York to see Donald Trump as president-elect before everything. What do you think he wants to get out of Donald Trump in the field of trade agreement?
Well, yeah, Trump's emphasis on the trade imbalance that the United States suffers with Asian countries, this is finally going to be addressed after decades of America running these trade deficits. So Shinzo Abe, the Japanese side, have a lot more to lose in the sense that their major exports are automobiles, and the Americans, of course, they can build very fine cars themselves. So there's going to be massive competition. And if the Trump camp comes through with their promise of imposing a 45% tariff on imported goods, the price of your average Lexus is going to skyrocket. The Chinese situation, while China has a much larger trade volume, a lot of that smaller consumer goods, cheaper stuff you find at Walmart, which can take a 45% tariff, but electronics are going to be a lot harder to shift back to the United States because they take a lot of labor power, especially in the inspection phase. So I think the promise of tariffs and punitive measures, that when it comes down to reality is going to have to go through the Commerce Department. It's got to be sector by sector, country by country, item by item. This is going to be a long process of negotiation. So right now, I think that constructive engagement between Chinese industry and the Commerce Department, between the Chinese government and the State Department and the Pentagon, that's the best approach.
Okay.
Policies aren't set yet. There's not a clear-cut strategy. So just show a sort of a general idea of what has to be done to get America out of this trend toward losses of jobs and economic decline.
So, Douglas, can we take Donald Trump literally when he say that he will slash punitive tariffs on imports 45%, or just campaign rhetorics? He won't deliver on that.
Well, I mean, there's a potential to make some individual tariff increases by exploiting the International Trade Commission's findings on dumping, for example. So it's possible that Chinese steel aluminum could be assessed a tariff because they're being, it's not in the American market. And if they do have a tariff, they usually are in the range of 400 to 500%, not 45%. So, but they would not be substantially affecting the bilateral deficit. The other side of Mr. Trump's domestic program is for tax cuts and a big increase in infrastructure spending, which probably are both good things for the U.S. But the inevitable law is that will turn into a bigger trade deficit, not a smaller one. And these various measures on trade products, whether it's automobiles or steel or something else.
Now let's step away a little bit from TPP. We jump into the story on Tuesday. Trump again sent out another tweet. His Twitter diplomacy mentioned that this deal with Japan, Japanese tech giant Softbank, will pour $50 billion into the U.S., which is expected to create 50,000 domestic jobs in the U.S., something that Donald Trump welcomed. And he even said he should claim credit for this. He said Softbank would not do this had he not won the election. So it seems Mr. Trump's economic policy will be quite different from his predecessor. How will this change the economic transaction between the U.S. and Japan and U.S. and China, Douglas?
Well, if the U.S. can be made to be more investor-friendly, that's going to be a good thing for employment, good thing for general economic growth in the U.S. That probably Trump has talked about separately, which is a lower tax rate on businesses in the U.S. If he can get through Congress, which I think he can, that should invite a lot of return of American investment from overseas as time passes and attract some new investment. If the infrastructure $1 trillion plan goes through, there'll be a lot more interest from foreign companies to get involved in that, and it would bring more jobs to the U.S. market.
And Mr. Teng, do you think that might be a good news for China, because China has the urge to invest and also to establish factories overseas, including the U.S.?
We can say this is a good news for Chinese people, but I think this is actually a political deal by the Japanese company. To some extent, it's a political deal or gift to the president elected by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, because he is going to meet Donald Trump 7 days after the inauguration of the U.S. president next month. So that might be a political gift for the coming president of the United States.
So you're saying this is not just a business deal? There are
to some extent,
undertones.
I think the Japanese are very good at this regard to make deal with the counterpart from the United States.
And Yoichi, you think this deal has more than just a business deal of making more jobs in the U.S.? Briefly.
Well, Donald Trump is riding on a lot of enthusiasm, wants to keep his base of, middle-class Americans, working people, very happy with that prospect of jobs, but he really didn't examine this deal. Softbank is basically coming over into the financial services sector to loan money to startup companies, and that the main, and of course Softbank already owns Sprint, a major telecommunications company in the United States, a very controversial deal that members of Congress felt very uneasy about. But also much of that fund is basically Saudi money. Trump has already said the United States is not going to buy Saudi oil. He doesn't want Saudi investment. And here it's being channeled through a Japanese company. So I think, he's got to be a little bit more careful than just, his little tweets now. He's getting closer to the presidency, and he's got to have a cabinet who can vet all of these deals and make sure. You remember how Bill Clinton, I think, was seen with a Colombian drug lord. He probably didn't know the man, but later he found out the man was a cocaine lord from Colombia. This is not good for American presidents, just to open the door to anybody who walks in.